Hello, in this tutorial video I'll talk about the anatomy of the optic nerve of the dog. Now the optic nerve or cranial nerve number 2 is a critical nerve to the animal's vision, as it helps to connect the animal to its surroundings. And sight gives the animal the ability to perceive movement, and then vision gives it the ability to make assessments about the movements. So the optic nerve is basically an extension of the brain. It transmits electrical impulses from the eyeballs to the brain. Then the visual sensory information is processed by the brain so that the animal can actually see the images. So in this video, I will explain the location, the function, and the distribution of the optic nerve. So after going through this tutorial video, you will be able to state the position of the optic nerve on the brain. You will also be able to name the brain attachment of the optic nerve. You will also be able to name the location of the nerve cell bodies of the optic nerve. You will also be able to state the classification or the major component type of the optic nerve. And finally, you'll be able to state the function and distribution of the optic nerve. On this slide, I'm going to give a brief description of the optic nerve. So the optic nerve is the second cranial nerve in position after the olfactory nerve. This is on the basis of how it is attached to the brain. So it becomes attached to the brain immediately after the olfactory nerve fibers have emerged from the olfactory bulb. So the optic nerve is the second cranial nerve in that respect. And the optic nerve is normally paired. So you have a right optic nerve which connects the right eyeball to the brain, and then you also have the left optic nerve which connects the left eyeball to the brain as well. And the optic nerve is just composed of the central processes of some ganglion cells of the retina which converge at a structure known as the optic disc, and these fibers pass through the choroid and scleral layers of the eyeball before they merge as the optic nerve and finally go to connect to the brain. So on the diagram on your right, you can see the eyeball, which is the white rounded structure there, and on the cranial aspect we can see the cornea there bulging out. Then also we can see the optic nerve itself, which looks like a tubular structure there emerging from the eyeball going towards the brain. Then we can also see some muscles, and these muscles are known as the extraocular muscles, and these help to attach the eyeball to the bony structures of the cranium. So this is the brief description of the optic nerve. On this slide, I'll talk about the optic nerve in terms of how it is attached to the brain, and also how it exits from the skull to go and get attached to the eyeball, and also the location of the nerve cell bodies for this cranial nerve, as well as how it is classified in terms of its function, and also I'll talk about its function and distribution. So to begin with, the optic nerve is attached to a structure known as the ventral diencephalon, and on the diagram on your right you can see the position of the optic nerve. So where there is that optic chiasma, the crossing over of the left and right cranial nerve, optic nerve number 2, that is the position of the ventral diencephalon. So that's the brain attachment for the optic nerve. Then also the cranial exit for the optic nerve is the optic canal. So it goes through the optic canal before it connects to the eyeball. Then in terms of the location of the nerve cell bodies, these are the cell bodies that receive the light impulse. So where are these cell bodies located? So we are saying they are located in the ganglion cells of the retina. And then in terms of classification as to whether it's afferent or efferent, or indeed the major component type, we normally classify the optic nerve as a spatial somatic afferent, or SSA. Then in terms of its function, of course, the function is just vision, and it is distributed within the eyeball in terms of where it is receiving its impulses, which is the light stimulus. So that is about the various aspects of the optic nerve. You have now come to the end of this short tutorial video on the anatomy of the optic nerve, which is cranial nerve number 2. So on this slide, I have included a few questions related to the anatomy of the optic nerve. I've included questions as well as the answers to those questions. So the first question is the optic nerve comes after which cranial nerve on the cranial side of the brain? So the optic nerve comes after the olfactory nerve, which is cranial nerve number 1. Then the second question is which two organs of the dog does the optic nerve connect? So the optic nerve, or the optic nerves, that is the right and left one, connect the brain and the eyeball. Then the third question is what is the main function of the optic nerve, and briefly explain how the optic nerve achieves its function. Of course, the main function of the optic nerve is vision, and to explain how the optic nerve achieves its function, we can say when the light hits the photoreceptors of the retina at the back of the eyeball, the photoreceptors turn the light into electrical signals or impulses, and these electrical signals are transported through the optic nerve to the brain at the occipital lobe, where the electrical impulses are now translated into the images which the animal sees. Then the fourth question is name the structure of the brain to which the optic nerve is attached. And we saw from the notes that this is the ventral diencephalon, which is the structure just above the optic chiasma. Then the fifth question is name the structure through which the optic nerve passes and emerges from the cranium or the skull. And from the notes we saw that this is of course the optic canal. Then the sixth question is name the location of the nerve cell bodies of the optic nerve, and the answer is the ganglion cells of the retina. And finally, how are the nerve fibers of the optic nerve classified, or what is the component type for the optic nerve? So this is the SSA, or they are classified as the spatial somatic afferent, and the SSA are just generally the afferent fibers that carry information from the special sense organs such as the eyeball and the ear. So those were the few evaluation quiz questions. I hope you had a relatively easy time to answer those questions. Thank you for watching and listening.